Hi, my name is Linda Hostetler. I'm a registered social worker and Buddhist lay chaplain. I've written a book called 21 Days to Die, The Canadian Guide to End of Life. I'd like to share with you some ideas from this book that might help you understand hospice, palliative care, and end of life in a way that you've never understood it before. What is hospice palliative care? It's really important to understand that palliative care is an idea about symptom relief, but it's so much more than that. A quote from the World Health Organization explains that palliative care is an approach that improves the quality of life of patients and their families facing the problems associated with life-threatening illness through the prevention and relief of suffering by means of early identification and impeccable assessment and treatment of pain and other problems, physical, psychosocial, and spiritual. And each of these components is really important to understand. It's about quality of life. It's about patients and families. It's about problems and symptoms that might come up that are very predictable. It's not a surprise how the body breaks down. And if we're surprised, it's because we haven't really let ourselves watch it and understand it. And then there is early identification and impeccable assessment and treatment, making sure that all the way to the end, one feels like one is seen as an individual and treated, not only themselves for the dying person, but also for their loved ones. In the book, I explain that there are many ways that one sees the dying process, and it's important to understand that things are happening at the body level. There's typical symptoms of how the body is slowly shutting down in a very predictable way. And there are many ways of providing support, comfort. It's often called, palliative care is often called a comfort measure. And there's medications for it. And there's also a lot of non-medical ways that family, loved ones can help to treat the symptoms and make them feel better in the moment. There are also speech considerations, and there are many conversations that appear at end of life that one can lean into, one can speak about, one can use as a way of connecting with loved ones. And these conversations may be some of the most profound in a lifetime, and they really promote closure and resolution. And if one recognizes the dying process, one is more willing to actually have these conversations. And it leads to completion, not only for the dying person, but for the loved ones that they leave behind. There are also many mind considerations. People are often surprised to find out what happens. What does the mind do as it nears the end of life? There are many paranormal experiences that often make the dying person feel like they're going crazy, and the family member trying to make sense of it. And understanding that there are portals of time and space, it just doesn't quite act like it normally does. Some of the science of everyday life doesn't seem to quite hold at end of life. And so regardless what your spiritual belief is, you might understand that there is something magical, mystical going on at end of life. And when you can face it fearlessly with guides and support, it becomes quite an interesting time for everyone. When someone is given a diagnosis, it's really important to understand that diagnosis and what it's going to look like. There is a trajectory of most illnesses, and doctors know this, and it's important when you're given a diagnosis of something, whether it's a terminal illness that will take you all the way to the end, or whether it's a chronic illness. It's important to understand what it looks like. Will you be fine one day and then suddenly drop off, die in your sleep? Will it be the kind that has a long, slow, gradual decline? You might be one of the cancers. A lot of the cancers fall in this category where you're given a diagnosis and there's a slow, steady decline over weeks, months, sometimes even decades. Another trajectory is the organ failure, where there is an up and a down. And each time one has a crisis, a down, it feels like it might be the last one. And then sometimes one continues, gets better for a while, and then never quite as good as before, and then slowly declines again. And this is often one of the hardest ones because the prediction is impossible to know when the low is low enough to cause a death. And it includes things like diseases like COPD, kidney failure. These are some of the ones that will have a lot of this up and down in the trajectory. And there's also the frailty, which is more likely to happen as one ages, gets over the age of 80, 90, and one might have a very low quality of life for a long time. And it might be very hard to predict when the last day might be. And so it's very slow, the decline. And as you can see in the second slide, the second image there, we often think that one has treatment and then eventually has palliative care and then dies. But what we're learning more and more, and what we're learning to ask for, is that when you're given a diagnosis, it's really helpful to actually have a palliative care team also assisting, so that as you have symptoms that appear, sometimes as a result of the treatment, even sometimes the result of the dying process. But it's important that the treatment team and the palliative care team work together all the way to the end, and that there's a balance back and forth as to which team you might have more interaction with. But we're encouraging people here in Ontario and around the world to start palliative care earlier, not just when death seems imminent, but earlier as a way of actually treating symptoms better and helping the process, helping individuals stay more comfortable. And then after the death, of course, bereavement support, because even when bereavement support is provided through social workers and death doulas and others throughout the illness, there's a lot of anticipatory grief that can be addressed before the death, but then after the death, it's really important to make sure that there is support for the people who remain behind. There is a particular sequence of the dying process, and if you understand where you are or where your loved one is in this process, you understand what's going on, how fast you're getting there. And there's different amounts of time between these. But if you understand that the very first part of the dying process really begins with extreme fatigue, not the ordinary kind that one has just from, going for a walk or something, but extreme fatigue in the body, day after day, constantly. And after that, the next thing that is in the sequence of dying is the individual is not able to walk. And the most significant part of this is that they can't walk even to the washroom. And this is a natural part of the dying process. And it signifies a real turning, because once the body cannot support the legs and you cannot walk, death is irreversible, and one does not suddenly go back to the fatigue aspect very often. Most commonly, the not being able to walk to the washroom is the turning point when one says, maybe I need more care, maybe I want to plan for the end, maybe I want to transfer to a hospice at this point, because at this point, the individual will need 24/7 care of all the toileting, all the personal care. And that's where the care from the caregivers can be quite overwhelming for families. And we all have this point of, wanting dignity and wanting to be able to walk to the washroom. But if we aren't able to, this is such a big step. Next, after that, and it's almost always after that, is the inability to swallow or eat. And I mentioned swallow because swallowing is really a muscle thing. We think of it as sort of an automatic response, but it's really related to muscles. And in the same way that water leaves our muscles in our legs and we're no longer able to support the legs, water also leaves the swallowing muscles of the throat. And at some point, food might be put in the mouth, but the swallowing cannot happen. There just is no muscle to move the food into the digestive system. And at that point, if one were to be fed, as families often want to do, if one wants to be fed, the food literally stays in the mouth and pockets in the jowls, or it slides into the lungs and causes aspiration pneumonia, which can actually kill someone quickly. So neither are very good options, and it's very important that caregivers watch to see when the swallowing cannot no longer happen, and at that point, eating must be stopped. Next after that is no longer able to drink. This is what's considered NPO, Latin for nothing by mouth. And at this point, mouth care is provided, but there is no more drinking water in the usual healthy sense. And after this, there is death with no longer able to breathe. And the removal of the breath is the final step. And you can see there are numbers associated here, and one moves through these. Sometimes it takes years, sometimes months, weeks. Generally, it takes a couple of weeks from the PPS of 30 down to 0. It can vary, but not being able to walk is often the beginning of the end in this kind of a way, and a time to really make sure you have your affairs in order. And make sure you've said all the things to your loved ones you want to say, and all the things you want to do with your mind when it's bright and able to communicate, you want to do before this point. And I mentioned these PPS numbers, and I'm really hoping everyone understands that PPS stands for Palliative Performance Scale, and it's a decremental scale from 100 down to 0. 100 is complete health, and 0 is death, and it goes down by 10. And in the early weeks, months, or years even, the numbers might go up and down a bit as one moves out of full functioning down towards extreme fatigue, and then the other things after that. Eating is an imperative in our culture, in all cultures, no matter what our background. And it's really important to learn that there is something called voluntary stopping eating and drinking that is a conscious ending of eating and drinking and allowing the natural death to occur. And it is something that the individual themselves must request. And in truth, everyone stops eating at a certain point, but sometimes loved ones will continue to encourage the individual to eat as if eating will keep them alive. But when the disease has taken its toll, when weight has dropped often down below 100 pounds, no matter what the individual weighed for much of their life, the individual has lost so much water, so much energy, and is close to death already. The voluntarily stopping eating and signaling to the body that I'm done, I'm ready, really allows a natural death process to happen. Much like fasting, a euphoria is attained often within a couple of days because the kidneys shut down, there's no more food, and people may be actually more conscious, more willing to talk. Sometimes people will literally become unresponsive as a result of this. But it's really important to understand this is a part of the natural death process, and certainly an option for people, particularly when they're at home. Often at residential hospices, people will request it as well. A little more challenging if one is in hospital or in a long-term care home. There are many opportunities for spirituality at end of life. Many people value the opportunity to focus on the wrapping up of one's life, the legacy that one has achieved throughout that lifetime, and a planning for the next stage, whatever that is. And if one has a spirituality, it can often be an important time to practice spiritual practices, also say comments, conversations, thanks and appreciation to your loved ones for the role that they played in your lifetime. Certainly in Buddhism, which is my practice, it's an opportunity for various meditation practices to occur. One says goodbye to one's loved ones and then focuses in on the clearest mind at end of life, leading to the clearest rebirth in the next. And even if one is using medications, opioids, morphine, or hydromorphone, which is one of the more common ones at end of life, one is still able to have a clear mind and do spiritual practices. And it's an opportunity to make good use of every minute of this lifetime. Thank you for listening to this video. I hope that I've answered some questions that you might have had about the dying process. I hope you've found some of your own fearlessness to approach it, and understanding that by leaning into the understanding of what is really happening, you can have the best way to end your life in the most peaceful way possible. You too can have a peaceful death with no regrets, and laying everything on the line and being able to end your life in the way that you choose. I wish this for each and every one of you. Thank you.